Thanks for coming back, guys, for another episode of the Hard Thing Podcast. In this show, we unravel the secrets of those who've done the hardest things in the world in ways that you can emulate their successes. I'm your host, Justin Lewis, and I've interviewed over 200 men and women who have done tremendously hard things, lived to tell the tale, and learned lessons that you and I can implement to do the same thing. So we are continuing our conversation with Frankie Russo back on Monday. So enough of me. Let's just listen up to our conversation with Frankie Russo. Well, thank you for coming back, Frankie. Starting off with the question that I was ending on last episode, you described having this process of inventorying or making an inventory of your emotions and asking the strategic questions of why am I having this? What part have I played in creating these emotions? And as you said that, it really made me think that that's a lot of what therapists and things like that do for us. Is that right?
Yeah, it's definitely similar, right? But the thing about therapy is that it's once a month, maybe every 3 months, once a year. If you're really doing intensive things, maybe you're going once a week. Therapy is really wonderful for reframing our perceptions on like kind of the big stuff and the broad strokes. Where a lot of the work that I focus on is the daily work. And when I'm not at a therapist, right? Or like some people practice religion. So when I'm not practicing religion as a community or something like that, those are the things that I try to really look at is where am I going with this? But yeah, for sure. I mean, therapists deal with emotions a lot. And I think a lot of the therapy that's done for people is around like more extreme situations, divorces, trauma,
sure,
couples having issues. But there's a lot of smaller components that I think are ignored on a regular basis. So one of the biggest issues is that when emotions, small resentments, small fears go uninventoried, when they go unlooked at for a long enough time, they're still affecting us. They usually, people call it the subconscious, but usually they're going out they're going in the background. So if you think about like an iPhone, I'm really bad about shutting my apps up. Closed. I wish they would just have a feature where it just closes them when I'm not using it, but they have their reasons for keeping it open. The problem is that it runs down the battery. It wears down. It's running in the background. It's taking up space. And it's affecting the performance of my phone or my computer, and it's putting a tax on that device. So that's a physical example that makes it easier to understand what I believe is happening in our bodies and in our mind and our emotions. When this stuff goes unchecked, there's a lot of stuff that we just ignore, and we just think at some point I decided that maybe I was supposed to ignore it, or that just doesn't matter. And it doesn't mean that we have to like be owned by these emotions. It doesn't mean that I have to live my life running off a cliff based on these emotions, but I also can't act like they're not there. You mentioned something on the last episode that was about, lying to ourselves and how it's like junk food and we love it. The fact is that for some reason we're wired to have that as like a survival mechanism. Okay. To like have what I call denial. And so what it does is it kind of puts these blinders on so that I can exist and not be in panic. So it's trying to help us. It's designed to help us. That part of us is not a bad thing. But when it's overused, which most of us do, and the way it gets overused is by putting in the conscience instead of like, so you've got all this stuff in the subconscious. If I put in my consciousness, my phone, and I put all this other stuff, and all the things I do and work and whatever the noise is, that's my consciousness. All that other stuff's back there. So we do that to kind of distract ourselves. That's the same reason why I did drugs and drank all the time. Those were the reasons, was because I didn't want to be close to those things because it's uncomfortable. The truth is that it's uncomfortable to have the emotions be at the forefront, and we don't like it. And we don't want to always be in these upheaval of emotions, but we just, whether it's a lot of emotions or it's no emotions, both of those I've got to look at, and I think a lot of people will just kind of medicate it to death, right? So either with actual medication or with other medicators, like, drugs, alcohol, sex, gambling, eating, whatever you're into, work. There's so many different ways to medicate ourselves, and a lot of us do, and it's a natural thing, and it's fairly accepted. As long as you don't go too extreme, it's accepted. I do a lot of things in extreme. So I went extreme on drugs and alcohol where somebody else can drink and do drugs and it's not a big deal, you know, but I went to the extreme. But that's why I'm grateful, because that extremity's brought me to a bottom that some people will never have. A lot of people do have it. You know, nowadays it's becoming more common. And it's more talked about. It's not like this like shameful thing, especially if you're doing something about it, you know? So that's kind of where all that kind of really matters when you're talking about really taking captive and being intentional with the stuff that's back there, bringing it to the front, inventorying it, and having a process for how you move forward with it. That's the other thing. You know, a lot of times it's confusing to people. It's like, what do I do to kind of move forward on when I have a negative emotion?
I think it's so obvious when you kind of lay it out like that that's what we're doing. You know, use the word distract. We do all these things to distract ourselves, TV, even social media, even these simple things to just distract ourselves. And we never sit back and ask, what am I distracting myself from? Because you can't just distract yourself. There has to be, you know, it's kind of a bait and a switch type idea. And I think, like you said, we're distracting ourselves from having these moments where we come to grips with ourselves. We have this deep, deep honesty. And so essentially what you're saying is you help people have this honesty. You help people say, you're feeling this minor fear, but why did you feel that? Or why, what part did you have in creating that? How do you help people get to, I guess, the rock bottom, you know, the clarity that you find at rock bottom sometimes without necessarily having to have the rock bottom, I guess?
Yeah. So there's no easy answer for that, right? So the thing about being a rock bottom is that you're desperate, and not everybody's desperate. So one of the things that I try to teach is that, you know, if you can use other motivators than rock bottom, that's the idea. So instead of like focusing on just like when you hit rock bottom, what I do is try to help people figure out, what are you passionate about? Okay. So in order to figure out what your purpose is going to be and how you're going to become successful and profitable or whatever, you got to go to the beginning, which is the passion. So we don't have to hit rock bottom to have that, like, to start this journey, right? I just have to have a desire to have a better life, to hack and rebuild my life I have now. And as long as I'm willing to do that work, I don't have to ever necessarily hit bottom. But we're always going to have difficult things. People are going to die. You know, we're going to get sick. There's so many different things that are accidents will happen. Everyone's going to have hard things. If they haven't already, they're going to have hard things happen to them. Those are the moments where we have to really dig deep and grow. And most people, I think, at the end of their life would tell you that those were the things that made them. But you don't have to be in a bottom or super desperate per se to start this, but you have to want it. You definitely have to want it, because it is work. And the first step though is looking at, you know, what am I passionate about? One kind of lighter things that I have done is inner child work, where I've really looked at who was I when I was 5 or 6 years old, before I got inhibited by what the world thought I should be, or school thought I should be, or classmates, or parents, or siblings, or what was on TV. It's somewhere in that, around like 5 or 6 for most of us, something either happens in our life or it just gradually happens. But you kind of wake up as an adult. It's like, when was the last time you even thought about what you were into at 5 or 6 years old? Right. Well, I just so happened to, because when I went through my divorce, I did a lot of inner child work, and really kind of looking at like, what makes me tick? How did I get here? Why did I get here? And I started to break that stuff down, and it's all there when you really look at it, and evaluate your life up until the point you're at. And you can really, when you start to put it on paper, which is a big, one of my big things, it's basic, and a lot of the things that I talk about, they are basic. I think people are looking for this like big, super answer to like some new like awesome piece of advice. But the truth is, like, some of the answers that people really need and that I really needed are basic, like just writing stuff down and inventorying and just looking at it. And the thing about asking, why am I here? Which is step one in breaking why. It's 10 steps. Why am I here is a question that I don't have to ask in order to survive. So in order to live and survive, I have to ask, what am I going to do today? Where am I going to be? When am I going? How is it going to happen? You have to ask those questions. So you're always going to ask those questions. You can live your whole life and never ask, why am I here? Why am I here in this moment? Why am I here on this earth? Whatever it is, right? And so when you get to those difficult moments, you end up finding yourself asking that question, right? Is the why. And so that's when it starts to be like, okay, well, like, all right, why am I here? Well, I believe it's so that I can have a connection with my family. I believe that I'm supposed to be doing something. But what am I passionate about? So there's two kind of parts of the journey that you want to look at. And sometimes the key to figuring out what you're passionate about is by going back and looking at that kid, the 5-6-year-old Frankie. And when I did, I found out that I was an astronaut, an inventor, a cowboy, and a TV preacher. That's what I was when I was 5 years old. So you know what? I at 40 years old, I try to allow myself to show up like that sometimes, and to actually recognize that kid's still in there and protect that kid and have a relationship with that kid. And some of this stuff might sound crazy to a lot of people, but these are just some of the things that have changed the way that I look at my life. I look at reality. I look at my own consciousness and existence, because that's really what this boils down to. And being willing to do the hard things and do some of the uncomfortable work of asking these questions, because I think some people are afraid to look at to see what's in there. But the freedom and joy, the sustainable freedom and joy that can come from this type of journey is worth more than anything you can buy.
On that note, I think in the next 5 years, being a cowboy inventor preacher in space is going to be increasingly more possible. So I don't think your
it's
inner
possible.
child. Exactly.
We'll get there.
Exactly. Personally, for you, how did realizing that your inner child wanted to do this and this, how did that kind of inform your current why and kind of help you create what you're doing today?
Well, like, for example, I know for me, doing talks and that kind of stuff is, I get a lot of energy and passion out of that. So that maybe that's the TV preacher. I don't know. And then I always loved music and stuff. And I think that was more the cowboy. I was a musician for a long time. That kind of came out. And then from an inventor standpoint, I've always been inventing things. I don't know if you can't tell, but behind me is one of my first inventions. It's a hoverboard.
Oh yeah.
It's actually the hover. It never actually worked. Otherwise you'd have already heard about me. And I'm sure I would have not had time for our podcast today, but I put that there as a reminder to always stay that weird kid. So I was kind of always a weird kid that was wanting to be inside in the laboratory, trying to make stuff. And I was always trying to invent stuff. And one of my first inventions was the attempt at a hoverboard. And so I always keep that around to remind me, not only that I need to always embrace that weird kid. My next book is actually going to be called Love the Weird. And it's about embracing a lot of this stuff. And but also like that I'm an innovator and inventor at heart. And so that part that has come out in my adult life as I got into software and technology inventions. I just recently sold my first tech invention software to a Fortune 500, which I'm super excited about, because that's even more freedom to be able to share my experience with other people that are trying to do similar things. But each one of those things that I just named, those are all different examples how unknowingly I was trying to get that out, that all those different inner child pieces. And so today I just kind of embrace all of that. And like my wife, I can tell you, she's been kind of going through this journey right now, and she's trying to like kind of look at, what's her why. And she always loved to teach. And like, she's never been a teacher. She was another business owner and stuff like that. But we have 6 kids now, which is crazy. And so, you think about that, and she's always having to deal with schools and stuff. But like, I don't know if she's going to become a teacher, but there's definitely something there. Cause like, that was her inner child. She loved to just teach. She would teach her, even if there wasn't any other kids there, she was like pretend teaching. And it's silly, but there's something to some of that. And I think it's important that we check back in with that stuff, because you see it all the time when someone's actually doing what they're passionate about for a living. And it usually has a lot of purpose, especially if what they're doing is authentic and they're trying to actually help other people as opposed to just turn a dime. It makes a difference.
I find this all very fascinating and somewhat coincidental. Maybe I was having an argument yesterday with my brother-in-law. He was wanting me to do the color code personality test, and in that you're supposed to take it answering as if you were your child self. And I was like, well, I'm not my child self. And I don't know, I feel a little bit more enlightened today based on what we talked about. But
nice.
You mentioned that you've merged your passion and your purpose. And in hearing you talk, it sounds like you take your passion from your child self and your purpose from your adult self and merge those together. And going back to what you also said about being desperate, when you're at your lowest, you're desperate. And I think the desperation in itself isn't good or bad, but the willingness, the openness and willingness to do new things, to try anything when you're desperate, I think is the gem that you get from desperation. And if you merge that gem with ideas of what you wanted to be when you were a child, you start to figure out things that you want to do right now. Like you mentioned that you wanted to be a preacher. In a sense, you're kind of preaching through these books. You're teaching truths to people. And I think a key that people need to understand is, not necessarily look back at what you wanted to be, but what you wanted to do. When my wife, she told me when she was younger, she wanted to be an animal finder. And she drew a picture of herself with a gun and a sword, kind of like Indiana Jones, right?
Yeah.
And that's not her saying she wants to be a zookeeper. What she just wants to be around animals. That's what she wants to do. And for her, that was play,
That's right. It's just like, I might never go to space, but I love it and I'm a part of it. I am technically on the waiting list for Virgin Galactic, but
that's cool.
They need to get the price down a little bit. It's like $250,000 right now. So I'm thinking about giving up my place in line, for now, just because it's like, there's a lot you can do with that.
Sure. Just wait a few years and the price will
I'm hoping that'll go down to a lot less. But anyway, it's not supposed to be like specific, right? Like I'm not wearing a lab coat today,
Right.
Although I'm not opposed to it. And, it's really looking at like, kind of like what's behind all that. Cause it is something beautiful. Just like hearing that story about your wife.
Mm-hmm.
Like we all have like a story like that. And it's important to remember that we take for granted that like, there's something unique about a child. And we just kind of think, oh, that's what the early years and that's just what they do. And then we're going to teach them how to be.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? But it's like, circle back to before we had to teach them how to be. And what was I? Before you had to teach me what to be or who I was supposed to be, what was I? Yeah. And it's not like the most profound thing, but those are things that like, they're not going to just naturally happen. I'm not going to just naturally try to like figure out what my passion and purpose is. Right. It's just not going to happen. I'm going to figure out like how to pay my bills today. And I'm going to figure out how to get to work. And I'm going to figure out like where the kids got to be. And if somebody's sick, you know what I'm saying? Or if the house is leaking, that's the kind of stuff that most of us are thinking about. Like, when the hell am I supposed to have time to think about passion and purpose? But I have to make time. I have to make it. And the people that make it, like, I'm not alone in this. There's tons of people that live by the exact same truths and principles in my books and in my experience that have never read my book and don't even know me. And how is that the same? It's because all truth is universal. If it's actually true, it's universal. And it's available to anyone, because accessing that is not something that is for sale. These truths are available to all of us.
Right. Um, you mentioned that one of the keys is that, after you do some of this introspection, is to kind of plug it into a process afterwards that helps you move forward, implementing the insights that you've gleaned from it. Can you describe to us a little bit about what that process looks like?
So as far as the inventorying part that I mentioned,
Exactly.
yeah, okay. So keep it simple. So what it is that the way that I practice is if I've got, let's just take a resentment, okay, and you ever resented anybody?
Oh, probably
Okay, we
all
won't
sorts of
name
people.
names. We're not going to name names. We're not going to put you on the spot since this is broadcasting. But let's just say there's somebody at school that was a bully to you.
Sure.
Okay, and you've kind of let it go, but it still bothers you, and you never really did anything wrong. You didn't retaliate, but they were always bullying you, and it stayed with you. It's affected you. So the first thing we do is name it. So I'm gonna name the person. I'm going to then go and I'm going to inventory what they did. I'm going to look at that. And then I'm going to really look at what has that affected? Has that affected my self-esteem? Has that affected my ambitions? Has that affected my, my instincts for emotional security? If it's somebody I resent because they stole money from me, has it affected my material securities? So that's the third thing that I look at. And then, but the last piece, and this is the most important, this is how you work your way out of it, is what is my part in this? So a lot of people ask, it's okay, well, if I was bullied as a child and I didn't do anything to deserve that, what's my part? It's the same thing with people who are victimized by, things that are sexual in nature that are a lot of people victimized on. It's well, what was my part? Especially if you're a child or you're helpless. And so we live with that kind of trying to kind of mull over, what's my part, so then our brain starts to tell us that maybe there was something I could have done differently. And so then all of a sudden it's my fault. So my part and my fault are not the exact same thing. All right. It's not my fault that I was bullied or that you were bullied or whatever it was. But my part in that is the acceptance and forgiveness. So acceptance and forgiveness is the critical piece, especially when it comes to anger and resentments and hatred. When I have that inside of me, that when that's part of my subconscious, part of my apps that are still running in the background, and I'm not finding a way to accept what it was and forgive, that doesn't mean I have to let the person off the hook. It doesn't mean I have to have a relationship with the person or the institution, whatever it is that I'm angry at or have an issue with. But it does mean that I have to find a way to be free inside of me and accept that, because what the real problem with not inventorying and going through these strategic emotions is the way that I'm going to treat other people as a result of this going undealt with. And I'm not even going to realize it's because of these layers of things that have happened throughout my life. And then all of a sudden it becomes a filter. You've probably heard people talk about projecting or something like that. I was talking with my wife about this yesterday. It's sometimes we get super emotional, and we're emotional what feels like towards a person that maybe we've only known a short period of time, but the emotions aren't right sized. It's because of all these other relationships, all this other undealt with strategic emotions that are not, well, they're emotions. They're not strategic yet. They're not really strategic until I do something with them. I have to make them strategic. Otherwise they're just emotions, and I don't always know what to do with them. Right. And the reason why this is important work is because the things we're talking about today, they're mostly emotional or spiritual type work. But one of the main things that I do in my books is try to help people apply that to everyday life, especially entrepreneurial life or work life, which is a place where you almost never really talk about these things. Maybe you talk about it with a friend at work or something, but it's not it's a core part of what I'm doing each day to be in the right, most effective, most purposeful place,
Yeah.
So once I identify that part, I can do something with it. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. It's the same kind of idea of, you could honestly use the same framework with business, like
Yeah,
name it. What happened? Something happened in business, something good, something bad. What did the people involved do? Like what were the causes essentially? And how has it affected our company? And what's our company's part, right?
that's
Uh,
right.
Simple
What can we do
framework.
differently? Yeah, because at the end of the day, what I look at things that look failures. Okay, let's say like failures when it comes to business. Anytime something goes wrong, like you've pissed off a client, you've lost a client, you lost revenue, something like that has happened, right? In our personal life, it might be I lost a relationship. Well, I've got to look at what can I do differently. I always see failures as opportunities. Okay, that's something that is not new concept. It's not new to me. I believe somebody told me a long time ago that that's how Steve Jobs looked at it. So that was good enough for me. So, but the idea was that like now when somebody comes to me with a problem, I've got to turn it to opportunity. Sometimes the only opportunity is a new protocol. Okay. So out of this, we're going to refine our process, but something's coming out of this. We're always going to look at our part, even if we know it's the most annoying person or client in the history of the universe. And I just can't stand them. And I'm so glad they're gone. Was there anything I could have done differently? And there always is something, right? Well, in our personal life, we call it boundaries, right? Creating those extra protocols. Like I'm not going to go to this place during these times because I know that doesn't work. And I'm going to do that so that I can still go to that place sometimes, or I can still be around that person. But I'm going to have these protocols or standard operating procedures in business. I'm going to have that also in my personal life. So like I'm looking at these things consciously instead of just ignoring it. See, if I have a problem with something and I just ignore it and I just keep ignoring it, nothing changes. That's why a lot of people get stuck in a job. They're thinking, oh, well, I got to do this job. I can't really say anything. I've got to keep making a living for my family. So I'm just going to ignore this. But the problem is it doesn't help the company and it doesn't help myself. Nobody's really getting help. We're just all kind of going along to get along. And meanwhile, the real person who's taking the brunt of this is me internally.
Like you said, at the very beginning, if nothing changes, nothing changes.
Mm-hmm.
Frankie, it's been wonderful having you on the show. We got to start closing up just so that way we don't take any extra time over what you've given me. But before we let you go, we need to ask, how can our audience reach out to you, support you, and see what you're up to?
Awesome. So Frankie Russo, if you put that in on any of the major social medias, obviously, my book Breaking Why is out now on Amazon, Books a Million, Barnes and Noble, and all major booksellers. My website is Frankie-Russo and also the School of Why. So Frankie-Russo.com or the School of Why.com. Both of those are going to go to the same place. So yeah, that's a great way to connect with me. I'd love to hear from you guys and maybe have you be a part of the School of Why community.
Excellent. And the last but not least thing we got to do is give our audience some action items. So this is what I came up with based on what we've been talking about. Number one, get deeply honest with yourself in front of the mirror, asking yourself some of the questions that we've gone through today. Number two is write down, 1 to 5 passions that you have. And number three is ask yourself, what did you want to do when you got older, when you were a child? And then write that down. Is there anything else you'd like to add to this list?
No, I think that's good. Did you mention the inventory process
That
we went over?
I'll write it down
Emotions
specifically.
Yeah, I would add that also just to make sure, and really breaking things down as far as you can. Like the more specific, usually if I don't like a certain job I had, so I may think that I'm resentful at that company. I'm not really resentful at the company. I'm resentful at this manager and this coworker. So the more specific we can be, the better. In really identifying what's going on with us today, so there's two kind of components to this. There's the first 5 steps of Breaking Why, and so in my book are the steps, by the way, and has all the exercises. So you can, if someone's looking to get started on what we talked about today, the easiest way is to get that book and start working the steps. But the idea is that you kind of get started with the first 5 steps on the big broad strokes of where we're going, what's our passion, what's our purpose, and what do we expect for profits. And then the second 5 steps of the 10 steps are about how I do the daily work.
Excellent. I will get all that up in the show notes, as well as how to reach out to Frankie. But thank you so much for being on the show, Frankie. I think we're just about to get it right on time. So I'll send you any follow-up questions I have over email, as well as when this show is going to come out. But thanks for being on the Hard Thing podcast.
Hey, man, I'm so glad to have been on, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. You have a good one.
You too.
Bye-bye. Thanks again, guys, for listening to today's episode. If you get a moment, reach out to Frankie and just tell him how awesome it was having him on the show, and just thank him, show him some love. I really appreciate you guys coming in and week out, listening to the show. Let me tell you, we got some interesting things coming through the pipeline. I got some things in the works that I'm working on and building. So 2022 is going to be a great year for those of you who listen to the podcast. Just stay tuned, buckle up, and get ready for the ride. Keep listening after the show to hear from our show sponsors today. But until next week, my friends, keep listening to the Hard Thing podcast and keep doing hard things, and you will overcome average. Today's show is also sponsored by the Breakfast Leadership Podcast. This is a show produced by one of my friends, and he was also on the podcast. His name's Mike Levitt. He was actually one of the earlier guests on the show, and he's been kind enough to support the show, so I want to support him. So go ahead and listen up to the trailer for his podcast, The Breakfast Leadership.
Want to grow your business and your life? Feeling stressed and a little burned out? Then take action and listen to The Breakfast Leadership Show, hosted by Michael Levitt. You'll experience interviews and top tips from global leaders, entrepreneurs, and marketing experts. Go to breakfastleadership.com. That's breakfastleadership.com. You'll find online courses, resources, and interviews with valuable business info all in one place. The Breakfast Leadership Show is available on your favorite podcast platform.
Hey guys, one quick announcement for today's show, and you might have heard this already, even in today's episode, but I have an awesome opportunity for you guys. Once in a lifetime, you have the opportunity to have dinner with myself and a covert CIA operative. That's right, an undercover spy. My guest, Andrew Bustamante, has been gracious enough to offer himself up as guest for a dinner with myself and one lucky audience member. So if you want to sign up for that, make sure you hit the link in the show notes below. As well, you can go to Instagram and hit the link in my bio at the Hard Thing Podcast. This is first come, first serve, and there's only one slot. So whoever signs up first will have the opportunity to come to Utah and have dinner with myself and Andrew Bustamante. It's an exciting opportunity. It's one that you'll be able to brag about to your friends, of being able to sit down having dinner with an undercover secret agent. So don't waste any time. Go ahead and sign up in the link in the show notes, or go to Instagram at the Hard Thing Podcast and click the link in my bio, and you'll find all the relevant information there. So look forward to having dinner with you.